Can we thank them for leading us this morning? Amazing. Well, it is a real honor to be here and to be with you today. If you've never been here before, I just want to say that this is holy ground. For so many years, countless lives have been changed in this place. In fact, I was preaching at my former church just yesterday, and I was talking with somebody who'd said, I was going to tell them I was going to be at Mount Hermon this week, and they said, oh my goodness, my father became a Christian at Mount Hermon over 50 years ago. And I just think about the stories like that have rippled out from this place year over year over year. And this place has played a significant role in my life. I've been here dozens of times over the years, often with my last church. And so I just want to encourage you to be in a posture of expectancy. That means you should expect God to do something in your life, in your soul, in your heart while you are here. It is not too much to ask God to move in a new way in your life. And whether you feel close to Him or far from Him or somewhere in between, I expect and we should expect to experience His movement with us today and this week. So I'm so glad that you're here and I'm honored to be with you. As I said, I've been here before, and I'm here this time with my whole family. I think we have a picture. This is my crew. It's my wife, Nina, our son, Jude, who's 2.5, our daughter, Nora. I think we have maybe one more picture of us out on the lake. Yep, that's us out playing around. That's actually the sun shining in Washington State. So it does happen. But we're super excited to be here, and I just have to tell you, I love getting to be a dad. And I love the way my kids laugh. I love watching them grow up. I love watching them explore the world. I love watching the light bulb moments of their discoveries as they grow and learn and experience new things. And I love that kids come out a certain way. Amen? Like you don't actually turn them. They just come out kind of as who they are. There's so much I love about being a parent. But when you become a parent, you also realize all the things that people didn't tell you about being a parent. It's usually the stuff that they know that you won't love so much about parenting. And at the top of that list for me was around lack of sleep. Like I knew, some of you are snickering, like you know it. Some of you are in it right now. I knew I would be tired. I'd heard stories about not sleeping as much. But I had no idea how much less sleep I was actually going to get. And that was especially true with our second child, Jude, who is a sweet little guy, such a sweet little guy. But when he was an infant, he was a terrible sleeper. In fact, for the first 4 or 5 months, we were getting maybe 3-4 hours of sleep over separate kind of chunks in the night for about 6 months. And Jude was a COVID baby. He was born February of 2020. So for those first few months, we had no visitors, no family, no grandparents, no babysitters, no neighbors, just us not sleeping. And I remember how resentful I would be when I would meet another parent and they would tell me how well their newborn was sleeping. They'd say, like, little Liam, he was sleeping through the night on day 4 and he was walking at day 8. He got into Harvard after a month. Like, he's doing great. You know those people? Some of you are nodding because you are those people, right? And you need to stop it, okay? But that kind of sleep deprivation does crazy things to your mind, doesn't it? It impacts your mood. It impacts your memory. It impacts your blood pressure. It impacts your immune system, your reaction time, your mental health. And at some point, if you're too sleep deprived, at some point, your body will actually fall asleep while you're awake. It's a real thing. It's called a microsleep. It's when your head gets real heavy, a moment where you can't keep your head up. You know, you can't hardly keep your eyes open, and you blink and like 6 minutes goes by. You know what I'm saying? Some of you are doing it right now. I can see it. I can see it happening in the room. That's all right. Our sleep deprivation for us got so bad. I remember thinking, you know, is there like an infant boarding school we can like send you to for a while? And don't judge me. You would have done the same thing if you were there. But we were really desperate for some real rest. We were desperate for rest. So why am I telling you that story? Well, for one, it's kind of cathartic to tell it. So thank you for being my therapy group for this morning. It feels good. But more importantly, it points to the subject I want to unpack with you. I want to explore with you over the next few days. And it's not sleep deprivation per se. It's around rest deprivation. Because here's my kind of theory about you, even though I don't know you or your story. My guess is if you're anything like the people in our church or like me, you are a rest-deprived person. Because we're living in a 24/7, gotta go faster, gotta get everything done, no time to rest world. And we end up living on this kind of cycle. I think I have a slide for this. A cycle that I would call busy, hurried, angry, empty. Because everybody's busy, right? Everybody's busy. There's always something to do. There's always somewhere to go. There's always something to do and check off the to-do list. And parents, this is especially true for you. Your kids have school and sports and music and friends and parties and church. Everybody's busy, and guess what? We are proud of it, aren't we? In fact, if you're not busy, there's almost like a shame factor. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, why isn't your schedule full of stuff? Which leads to being in what? A hurry. We try to do things faster and faster and faster. We hurry in our cars. We hurry in our conversations. We hurry to go to sleep. Anyone ever try to hurry to go to sleep? Doesn't work out, does it, right? Nina and I were recently driving on the freeway, and there was this car that kept changing lanes trying to go through traffic faster. You know those cars are trying to get through faster and faster, and they're on your tail and moving around, and he was cutting people off and making other drivers mad, and folks were honking at him until Nina told me, Scotty, just stay in your lane. Like, stop driving that way. Because it's usually me in our family who's in a hurry, she'd tell you. But it's this frantic kind of hurried lifestyle that leads to this growing level of irritation, frustration, and anger. We are more and more easily irritated than we've ever been. You know, it's like when someone brings 13 items into the 12 items or less line. You know that moment? And you kind of want to call down the fires of heaven on that person, and you're like, or is it just me? Am I the only bad person in the room who would do that? Yeah. It's more like, and we're growing more angrier as a society. Has anyone noticed we're growing more angrier as a society as a whole? I mean, things have never been more convenient for us. No society has had the conveniences that you and I have, and yet people have never been more easily frustrated. And it's this busy, hurried, easily angered kind of way of life that leads not to being full and satisfied and whole, but feeling empty and exhausted. Our calendars are full, but our souls are getting empty. And let's be honest, the pandemic hasn't broken down this cycle, it's intensified it, right? It's made it worse for lots of people. And you know this, but I'm going to say it anyway. This way of life, this cycle we're on, is not leading people to a life of more flourishing and more contentment. Just the opposite. We're overworked, overstressed, overscheduled, and overextended. I would argue that we are the most rest-deprived people in human history. Just think about that for a moment. And that may be why some of you are here. Maybe you're here to get some rest, find some peace, a change of pace, something that can break that cycle. Well, here's the bad news. I want to start with the bad news. As wonderful and restful as a vacation or a retreat or a family camp can be, and this week is going to be wonderful, and I pray it's very restful for you. As wonderful as it may be, getting away for a week probably won't break this cycle in your life. Because as soon as you get home, the relentlessness of your life will kick you right back on that cycle of busy, hurried, angry, and empty. I had a conversation with someone not long ago who was feeling that sense of emptiness and exhaustion from these last few years. They felt like they were spiritually depleted, emotionally exhausted, relationally frayed. And so he actually told me that he had booked the nicest room in the most expensive hotel in Hawaii, so he could get away for a week and find some peace and perspective. But he was already worried that just getting away for a week in Hawaii wasn't actually going to change the way he lived his life when he got home. And you know what? He was right. It wouldn't. And so I felt like as a pastor, I needed to say something or do something to help him. And so I told him I would gladly be willing to go and stay in that room for you. Like I would do that. I would take that. Vacations are a gift. Getting away to a beautiful place in God's creation is a huge gift. But have you ever noticed as soon as you're back, you're right back on that cycle of busy, hurried, angry, empty? It's why, and it was just mentioned earlier, it's why sometimes we get home, we feel like we need a vacation from our vacation because we didn't break the cycle. But what if I told you there was a way to break the cycle? What if I told you there was a way to reduce the exhaustion? What if I told you there was a way to find real rest and contentment, where at the end of the week, you're not feeling more empty, you're feeling more satisfied? If there was a way, just a question for you to think about. If I told you where there was actually a way, would you be willing to try it? Would you be willing to try it? When you get back home, when you're back in your routines, when the chaos returns, would you be willing to try it? Because guess what? There is a way. There is a way. And before I tell you what it is, I want to give you a picture of it. You can find it in different places in the Bible. There's a great picture of this in the life of an Old Testament prophet named Elijah. And if you know some of his story, he was a prophet who stood up for God in a culture that was counter to where God was going. And he was standing up to King Ahab, and Ahab was not a good life, and Elijah's life was under threat. So Elijah had been busy speaking for God, but now he has to hurry and be on the run and get away from all that. And he runs away, and he gets angry at God. He tells God, I've had enough of all this. And then Elijah says, God, just take my life. I'm done. So he's been on that busy, hurried, angry, empty cycle. He's done. He's at the end of his rope. So you know what he does? Anyone remember what he does? Well, he doesn't go to church. Although church is a really good thing. I lead one. So I'm all for going to church. He doesn't read a book. Although books are great things, great resources. Doesn't take a class. Doesn't listen to a podcast. Those can be great ways to recharge. Does anyone remember what Elijah does in that moment? He lays down and he goes to sleep. Very, very spiritual of him, right? He goes to sleep. And when he wakes up, God provides food and water. Not in lesson, not instructions, not something to think about. Food and water so he could eat and be refreshed in his body. And you know what he does next? He goes back to sleep. What a lazy bum. He goes back to sleep. And it's only after he completed a day of rest, bracketed by 2 experiences of sleep, that he was able to hear from God the story of that still small voice, the whisper that many of you know that story, and he could continue on. Here's my point. There's a way to break out of the cycle of busy, hurried, angry, and empty. There's a way to reduce your exhaustion and your frustration, to avoid that physical or spiritual breaking point that we so often find ourselves in. And it doesn't require you to make more money or spend time on nicer vacations or find a different job or be in a different season of life. But it does require a different way of life. It requires you to adopt a different rhythm to your life. It's the practice that Elijah discovered that day in the wilderness. And here's the thing. It wasn't a new practice or a new idea. In fact, it's actually the oldest spiritual practice in the Bible. So we're going to talk about the oldest spiritual practice in the Bible. It's literally how God designed the world to work. It's how God designed you to work. It's something the ancient Israelites called Shabbat or Sabbath. And it's a real complicated, like you got to have a PhD on this one. It's a real complicated idea. It's a day of rest every week. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that hard to understand? It's a simple thing. It's a day every week to rest, to stop your work. Now, before I go on, I just want to call out some of the disappointment that some of you may be feeling right now because you were hoping we would talk about something that was going to add new wisdom for your marriage or new skills for parenting or new perspective maybe on faith or scripture. But the Sabbath, rest, for most people that sounds irrelevant, unhelpful, outdated. And I get that. For most of my life, I have found this conversation around rest or Sabbath to be something that seemed antiquated, unnecessary, even for people who just kind of drift towards like laziness. But I want to be a go-getter. I want to do something with my life. I don't have time or space for that. But I want to give you some challenges to that paradigm or that frustration, just to help you think a little bit broader about this. Consider this. The Sabbath is one of the first things we learn about God. It's one of the first things we learn about God. Before we hear anything about his love or anything about his faithfulness, we hear about his rest and his focus on rest. Here's a text from Genesis 2 after God creates the world in 6 days. Look at this text. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. But by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. This is not like several books into the Bible. This is on page 2. This is fundamental to who God is. And by the way, God didn't rest because he was tired. He wasn't like, wow, this creating business was really hard. I gotta take some time off. God made a decision to rest. He made a decision to rest, even though he had plenty left in the tank and there was plenty more to be done. And not only that, if you know the story, you know this is the only part of the creation story, the Sabbath day, is the only part of creation that God designates as holy. Did you know that? The earth isn't holy. Human beings aren't holy. It's the only thing that's designated as holy. Just the seventh day, when God rested. There's a Jewish writer named Abraham Heschel. He's a fascinating writer. And he talks about how unique this would have been in the ancient world. How in the ancient world they would have expected the holy, what was designated as holy in creation to be a place, a temple, a sanctuary, and a place even like this where you could come and gather and experience God, a location where people could go. That's what's going to be holy. But the God of the Bible didn't designate a place that's holy. He designated a time. As if to say, you can find me anywhere in the world as long as you're willing to stop and rest. And if that doesn't convince you that we need to talk more about this, we need to learn more about this, consider this. Keeping the Sabbath, taking a day to rest, is actually one of the 10 commandments. Did you know that? We don't think about it that way, but it's in the top 10 of God's moral law for the world. It's commandment number 4, and it's the longest of the 10 commandments because God knows we would argue with him about this one. So he needed to really give us some details. This is Exodus 20. God says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals. We have a dog named Bailey. She does no work, so I have no idea what that's in there. Nor any foreigner residing in your towns. But for 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord God blessed that seventh day, and made it holy. Remember the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath. It's on the same list as murder, adultery, theft. In fact, it comes before those things. And yet for some reason, and I'm guilty of this as well, for some reason we treat it like it's optional. Honestly, we reward people for breaking it in our culture, don't we? I mean, if I were to break one of the other 10 commandments, there would be spiritual, vocational, even legal consequences. And yet, if I break the Sabbath, I might get promoted, right? He's doing great. He's bringing it all. He's giving all he can. Let's promote him. Now, I'm not saying that hard work's a bad thing. I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive to achieve or have success. Hard work's a good thing. We're going to talk more about work and workaholism a little bit later this week and how our work is an impediment or can be an impediment to rest. But here's what you need to know. God did not create you just to do work, vocationally or spiritually. For 6 days you shall do your work, but the seventh day is a day to stop and rest. And so we're going to spend these next few days unpacking how it is that people in our day, in our lives, in the 21st century chaotic world that we live in, given the roles and the callings and the burdens you may be carrying, how it is that we can actually practice a more sabbatical, Sabbath-driven lifestyle as a way to speak into this 24/7, faster and faster and faster kind of world we live in. Because what kind of witness will we have about a God who rests if we don't know how to do it? So we're going to talk more about that. And I'm going to try to convince you to take it really seriously when you get back home after this week. But the best part of this is, and this is just for you to know, the best part of this is, if at any point in this message you need to fall asleep, you go for it. Just consider it part of your Sabbath, okay? So I'll give you that one. But for the rest of my time for this morning, I just want to walk through, why did God do this? God could have created us in a different way. Why did God do this? Why did he create a Sabbath? Why did he call it holy? Why is this so central to who he is and how he works? Because if you don't understand why God rested, if you don't understand why God created the Sabbath, you certainly won't keep it. You certainly won't keep it. So maybe 4 observations for you to reflect on today and this week about why God created this day of rest. The first one is this: God made the Sabbath to reveal his character. God created a day of rest for you to reveal his character. That is, to show us something about who he is. Here's a question for you. How many of you secretly think or secretly worry that God isn't very fun? See, you're not raising your hand because you're worried he'll be mad at you if you do. So you're already like, I'm not going to tick him off. See, and that's the problem, right? No one admits that because we don't want to tick God off, which proves the point. A couple weeks ago, I was up early, and I was getting some stuff done around the house, and I heard our son Jude wake up, and he was calling out from his room, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." But I was busy getting some stuff done, so my wife Nina said, "Hey, just pick him up, bring him to me. I'll take him for a little bit while you get your stuff done out there." And so I went to his room, and I picked him up, and I took him to Nina. But when I did that, I was so busy, I was so thinking about kind of my tasks for the morning, I picked him up and took him to her without saying a word. No, "Hey, buddy," no, "Good morning," no, "How'd you sleep?" I just took him, handed him off. And then when I left the room, he looked at her and he said, "Daddy mad? Daddy mad?" I know I'm a terrible father. I mean, honestly, I don't know how I get invited to speak here. So he assumed my posture of busyness was one of anger or disappointment. He assumed my posture of focusing all these things that in my head, were part of helping my family, part of serving my family. He just missed all that because that's not what he was thinking about, and assumed it was something wrong with him or with us. And here's the thing. That's what we think about God, isn't it? That's what we think about God, that he must be busy, he's moving, he's got lots to do, he doesn't have time for me. And so there's this sense that he's serious, he's demanding, "Don't bother me, I'm busy." Is the way I know so many people think about God. And that leaves us kind of like my son going, "Daddy mad? Daddy mad?" But that's not the kind of God we find in the creation story. Oh no, on the seventh day, God doesn't evaluate, he doesn't bring a clipboard, he's not reviewing, there's no performance review. God doesn't rush to get something else done, even though there's way more he could do. He stops, he rests, and get this, he enjoys himself with his creation, with you. And you can see the same in the life of Jesus. We sometimes picture Jesus as this kind of stoic, aloof, philosophical, religious guy, rabbi. And we forget that Jesus went to parties. He turned water into wine. He had little kids jumping on his robes and hanging out with him and kind of playing around, which means Jesus had to be fun, right? I picture him having Skittles in his pocket, "Don't tell your parents, here you go." He had to be fun, okay? And you know this, parents, because if you have kids, your kids don't go play with a stranger unless they've got candy in their pocket, right? That's what brings them around, right? It was the disciples who were like, "We need to get the kids out of here. We need to stop this fun." In other words, it's Jesus' followers who don't know how to play, not Jesus. Think about it this way. Most Christians I know have a theology of God, a theology of sin, a theology of redemption, a theology of work, a theology of the church, a theology of the Holy Spirit. We have or have heard or have thought about those kind of things. But what is your theology of play? Do you have one? What is your theology of doing nothing? Do you have one? Just think if there were a class or a track in seminary for pastors called Christian Fun. Everybody would take it. Or maybe nobody would because it sounds weird, but that's the problem, right? It sounds weird. But all that is to say, it takes a certain kind of God to create the universe and then say, the one holy thing in this whole place is going to be a day every week where we stop and enjoy it. That's holiness, at least according to the Bible. And friends, there was no other God in the ancient world like this. The other creation stories of the ancient world, human beings were created to work for the gods. This is going to sound familiar because we live this way. Our idols are like this. We live for idols like success, promotion, work, achievement. Those gods don't care about people. Those gods don't give people a break. Think about the stories of the Israelites in Egypt. They were forced to serve the gods of Pharaoh, who only valued them for how many bricks they could produce. The more bricks you make, the more valuable you are. And that's what happens to us in our day when we lose sight of who our God is. We inevitably fall into serving other gods like success or achievement or hard work. And here's the thing, friends, with those gods, when you serve those gods, whether you're in Christian ministry or you're in some other vocation, when you serve those kind of gods, the more bricks you make, the more money you earn, the more promotions you get, the more hours you can work, the more valuable you think you are. That's what those idols will tell you. But when God, you'll know the story, when God delivered the Israelites out of slavery, He didn't say, now I want you to go and be slaves for me. Now I want you to go out and work really hard for me. You know what He said? Remember the Sabbath. Remember, I'm a different kind of God than Pharaoh. All those habits that served you in Egypt won't serve you with me, because I'm the God who created the weekend, literally. I'm the God who stops and rests and enjoys. I'm the God who says your worth is not based on what you do. You see, the Sabbath reveals God's goodness, His character, and it's so, so good. And one of the themes we're going to come back to this week is just the goodness, the joy, the playfulness of God. That's the first reason. There's a second reason God creates this Sabbath, creates this rest. He made the Sabbath to bless people. God made the Sabbath to bless people. Think again back to the story of creation I just read. And before that, we know there's 6 days of creation. Anyone remember the day that on which day God created human beings? Day 6, right? They were created on day 6. And then on what day did God rest? Day 7. So here's a question. What did the first human beings do on their very first day in the world? Nothing. They rested. Before they clocked an hour of work, before they clocked an hour in the garden, God gave them a day off. I mean, imagine starting a new job, and the first day you get there, they send you on a vacation. Imagine starting at a new school and your first day being told it's summer break. And a writer named A.J. Swoboda calls the Sabbath the first image of the gospel in the biblical story because it's a sheer gift. Before you pick up a stone, before you name an animal, I want you to know my grace and my goodness. I want you to rest. It's a blessing. But for most people, we feel or hear or think about a word like Sabbath or rest, and we immediately think it's going to be a burden. It's another thing I got to do, or another thing I'm going to fail at, or there's all these rules and conditions about what I'm supposed to do, not supposed to do, and I get that, right? In Jesus' day, there were 39 specific activities that were considered unlawful to do on the Sabbath, and hundreds of additional rules around those 39 categories, which made the Sabbath more of a burden than a blessing. And the same sentiment can be found in the church and church history as well. Some of you know this, that in our country there were things known as blue laws. Anyone ever heard of a blue law? Remember these? Yep, see your hands going up. These were laws that made certain activities illegal to do just on Sunday, just on the Sabbath day. For example, here's kind of an example of one. In the late 1800s, some of you may know the story. Soda shops were kind of all the rage back then. And the most popular item at the soda shops were ice cream sodas, which were made of ice cream, flavored syrup, and soda water. And they were especially popular on Sundays, which made lots of people in my profession kind of mad because people were more excited about going for ice cream after church than actually going to church. Imagine people liking ice cream more than church. Who knew, right? So pastors, it's a true story, pastors started speaking out against what they called the immoral soda, right? Crazy. It's true. Pastors do weird things, okay? Can we just name that? We say and do weird things. The immoral soda, and eventually several states passed laws prohibiting people from drinking soda water on Sunday, just on Sunday. But the soda shop owners were creative. So they started kind of moving around the rule. And so they started selling ice cream with flavored syrup, but no soda water, just on Sunday. Any guesses on what this was called? Ice cream sundaes. It's a true story. It's totally irrelevant to this message, but you can't say you didn't learn something today, okay? Anyway. But the point of all this is, for thousands of years, we have this kind of internalized fear or concern that God's command to keep a Sabbath or command to take rest in our lives is a burden. It's going to slow you down. And people have viewed it that way. But if you look back at Jesus' ministry, you'll find that Jesus was often breaking those man-made rules around the Sabbath in order to keep it what? A blessing. People ask, well, why did he do what he did on the Sabbath? It wasn't about following rules. It was all about making it a blessing. For example, he picked grain on the Sabbath. Why? Because food is a blessing to those who are hungry. He healed someone on the Sabbath. Why? Because healing is a blessing to a body that's in ailment. He called himself Lord of the Sabbath because his life was always a blessing. And when the religious leaders challenged him, he reminded them that God made the Sabbath not as a burden, but as a blessing. He said, and you know the scripture, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In other words, the Sabbath is for you. It's for you. You get a day, not to be driven or productive or efficient or effective. You get a day to rest and enjoy and celebrate. You get a day that's all about being blessed. And if you're wondering, how do I do that if I have young kids or I'm a caregiver or I'm caring for aging relatives or I'm a working parent, how do I do this? We're going to talk more about that tomorrow morning, so you got to come back for that one. But the Sabbath is not meant to be a burden, it's meant to be a blessing. That's the second thing. Third reason is this: God made the Sabbath, He created rest to free us from our burdens. To free you from your burdens. I have a fill-in-blank question for you. I want you to all, you don't have to say anything out loud, but just think about how you would fill in this blank, okay? I want everyone to think about how you would complete this phrase. I have it for you. Yeah, I wish I could be set free from. I wish I could be set free from. What's in that blank? Maybe it's a compulsive habit or an addiction. Maybe it's a health problem, financial problem, relationship problem, family problem. Maybe it's fear or anxiety, worry, loneliness. Maybe it's bitterness, resentment, unforgiveness in your heart. Maybe it's just anger at the state of the world or the government or the pandemic or something. One of the things that goes, or a key word that goes in that blank for me, is the word anxiety. I don't know about you, but I worry recreationally. It's one of my spiritual gifts. I can worry about things that I have no business worrying about. But those of you who battle anxiety or depression, you know how debilitating it can be, right? In fact, a little over a year ago, I had just boarded an airplane, and I was already feeling anxious about some church stuff going on. And at that time, right when I got on the plane, I got a text from my wife, Nina, saying both of our kids had fevers. Which is a big deal, obviously, in these days. And I was just about to leave town, and as soon as I sat down in the chair, I started to feel my heart pounding almost out of my chest. I could feel tightness in my chest. I couldn't calm myself down. I was breathing faster and faster. Anyone recognize what was happening to me? I was having a panic attack. And I knew in that moment I needed to get off that plane. But they were already in the process of closing the doors, which, as you know, when they close those doors, that's a very permanent deal. You're on it. And so I got up and told one of the flight attendants, I think I'm having a panic attack. I think I need to get off the plane. And I could tell she wanted to keep things moving. Sir, it's going to be okay. You can sit down. We can get you some water. She's trying to kind of keep things moving, asking me to sit down. So I started thinking to myself, how do I get off the airplane? And again, this is months ago. So I thought to myself, I'll just take my mask off. And they'll kick me off the plane. And I'll be in CNN and lose my job. But at least I'll get off the plane, right? But at that moment, I didn't care. I just needed to get off the plane. But thankfully, another attendant came over. We had a conversation, and she said, it's okay. And they let me off the plane. And I went and I sat down by the gate, and I just wept. What's happening to me? Why is there so much fear in my body? And I felt scared, ashamed, like a failure. I mean, I'm a pastor. Pastors are supposed to lead people to Christ on planes, not get off them, right? At least they say so in their stories. But it was that moment, in that very moment, God reminded me of these words of Jesus. I want you to look at these, read these with me. These remarkable words. He said, come to me, all you are weary and burdened, and I will give you what? Everybody say it. Rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find, everybody say the word, rest for your souls. Oh. Now, the hard thing when I remembered those words was Jesus didn't say, I will change your circumstances. You'll never have a panic attack again. All your problems will be solved. But he said something better. He said, no, you'll find rest in the midst of the attack, in the midst of the storm, in the midst of the fear. But to get that rest, what do you have to do? You have to go to him. Come to me, he says. You have to do what else? Take his yoke upon yourself. By the way, and you know this if you've been in church, you've heard this text exposited before. A yoke is a harness that two oxen would wear so they could plow a field together. But here's the thing, a yoke only works if the oxen are moving at the same speed. Which means to find freedom from your burdens, you don't need to just ask, what would Jesus do? You need to ask, at what pace would he do it? How fast? What speed? Because here's the thing, if you go read through the Gospels, I encourage you to do this. Go find me a place where Jesus was in a hurry. You won't find one. Find me a place where he overworked himself. You won't find one. Find me a place where he got empty. Won't find one. And he can help free you from the burdens you're carrying, not by removing them from your life, but by giving you a kind of rest that transcends that fear, that pain, that burden that you carry. But you got to come to him and learn his rhythm of life. Not just his ideas or his teaching, but his rhythm, his way of life. And we find that in his way of doing rest. Now, I'm not saying that Sabbath or rest will instantly solve that problem in your marriage or your work or your personal life. But I am saying it will create the context or the space in which you can be changed. He can do work in your life because it creates space for you to cast your cares upon him. Why? As the prophet says, because he cares for you. Because he cares for you. So just to review, God made the Sabbath to reveal his character, to bless people, to free us from our burdens. One last reason, God made the Sabbath, he created rest to teach us to trust him. To teach us to trust him. Because here's the thing. You actually can't keep the Sabbath. You can't keep a rhythm of rest in your life and not trust God. You can't do this and not trust God. The pressures, the demands, the expectations around you, those don't go away. The world out there is not going to Sabbath with you. It's going to keep moving. It will threaten to leave you behind. You're going to have to trust God if you're going to do this. But the counter, I believe, is also true. You can't trust God and not keep the Sabbath. You can't really trust God and not rest. Meaning you can't say you trust God and then go out into the world and live as if you're the sole provider. You're the person in control. You can go to church and do that. You can read your Bible and do that. You can have lots of religious activity in your life and do that. But without the Sabbath, without rest, you'll end up back on that same cycle of busy, hurried, angry, and empty. And guess what? There are a whole lot of people in churches today who are just like that, aren't they? You see, rest, I love this. Rest is an act of faith. That's all it really is. It's an act of faith. It's trusting that God will still provide for you if you turn off that email, if you put down the to-do list, if you stop working those extra hours. Rest is an act of faith. Not just that God will provide for you, but that he understands how you work. That he made you. He knows how you tick. He designed you a certain way. And it's not just to go, go, go all the time, but to rest and reset. Reset. A few weeks ago, I was trying to kind of get some stuff done on my phone, and it was, scrolling through some stuff, and it wasn't working right. It started to freeze up. Anyone have their phone freeze up where it's getting, gets still, it's not working? And so I did what most people do when their phone starts to not work. I started shaking it. Ever do that one? You're shaking it, and I'm banging on it like this, trying to get something to work. Don't look at me like you don't do this. I know you've all been there like shaking that phone out. And as I was doing that, a friend of mine looked at me and said, "Hey, have you tried turning it off?" And I was like, "No." I mean, when was the last time you turned your phone off? Like 2014? Like when was it? Think about it. It's a long time ago that you turned your phone off, right? And he said, just turn it off. because it wasn't made to be constantly running. It needs to reset. And so do I, and so do you, because that's how God made us. And when we don't stop and rest, what we're really saying to God is, I don't trust you. I don't really trust you. I don't trust that you'll provide for me the way I need or my family needs. I don't trust you'll be faithful. God, I don't trust that you understand what I'm going through, as I often feel for some reason. It's sort of ironic because the God of the Bible is the only God who 100% understands the pressures and demands of human life, isn't he? Because he lived it in the person of Jesus. And by the way, with Jesus, there was always a crowd or a question or a need or a demand, but he didn't just teach and teach and teach and teach and teach. He didn't just heal and heal and heal and heal and heal. He stopped. He got away. He spent time alone. He relaxed with his friends. He was never in a rush, ever in a rush. And best of all, he always invited busy, hurried, angry, and empty people to come and rest and enjoy with him. And we're going to talk more about that over the next few mornings. But the first decision you have to make, for your life around this idea is if you're open to it. Like, are you opening to try God's way of doing rest in your life? Because if you're sitting there going, this day of rest, this Sabbath idea, this talk I'm hearing, that sounds great for people who have no ambition or don't have important jobs or don't have a family as complicated as mine, who can't pull their own weight. That sounds good for them, fine. But I've got a life to build. I've got goals to achieve. I've got something to prove. I don't have time to stop. If that's you, not only will the rest of my time with you in the mornings not be very helpful to you, I would wonder how much more time you want to waste spending with God himself. Because here's the thing about God. God is just going to slow you down. God is just going to relieve your stress. God is just going to bring you joy. God is just going to love you for who you are, not what you do. And who needs that anyway, right? I do. And my guess is you do. And I know our world does. And I'm really looking forward to unpacking more of this with you over the next few mornings. But for now, let me pray. Or let's pray. Jesus, you are the Lord of the Sabbath rest. This way of life, this countercultural rhythm that seems to stand in contrast to the way our world would call us to live, to go, 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 to do more, do more, do more, to prove and accomplish and achieve, trying to establish some semblance of worthiness or worth deep inside our souls. And so I pray that you remind us this week that we can stop and rest in your love. That we can literally take a moment and build our life, not around our goals or aspirations, our plans or our dreams, but your unconditional love for us. Help us build this week a different way of life and rhythm of life together so we can go back into our lives as changed people, not just based on what we think, but the rhythm in which we want to live. May we remember that you are just as glorified by what we choose to stop doing as you are by what we choose to start doing. Help us rest in you today and this week. Jesus, we love you. We love you for this gift of rest that you give us. And we pray this in your name. Everybody said, amen.